our next speaker is Eleni Vasilaki from the University of Sheffield. Eleni is the chair of bio-inspired machine learning at Sheffield, where she leads the machine learning research group. As well as bio-inspired machine learning, she specializes in neuromorphic computing and computational neuroscience. Some of her most recent work has focused on echo state networks, which is a key reservoir computing method about which I think we might hear more in a moment. According with her early education in Athens, she's also written a very interesting article on Epicurus, the father of reinforcement learning. And her title today is Sparse Reservoir Computing. So over to you, Eleni.
So thank you very much for this introduction, and even more so for the invitation to give this talk. And I'm going to speak about my pet topic, at least my favorite topic for the moment, and that's sparse reservoir computing indeed. So this is work with Luca Maneschi, a very bright PhD student, now colleague in computer science, and Andrew Lin in biomedical sciences, both at the University of Sheffield. And indeed, there is a lot of interest for large complex brains and models. And I'm still fascinated by the simplicity of insects. In particularly, if we think of the mushroom body, the area that is responsible for learning associations in the fruit fly that Andrew studies. We're thinking about 2,000 Kenyan cells receiving input from antenna lobe through projection neurons, and then project themselves downstream to neurons that encode for whether a stimulus is undesirable or desirable. And on this setup, I would like to point out that these neurons, the Kenyan cells, they provide a sparse representation. And this is achieved through an inhibitory neuron called APL. Now, Andrew tried to see what is the effect of blocking APL in discrimination of odors. And what you see here in this figure with red is when APL is not present, so you don't have sparse representations. And in gray when there is no alteration in the circuit. And what you can see is that if the fruit fly is given to distinguish between very dissimilar odors, there is not much of a difference in performance, where here the learning index is higher is better. And while once you block the APL and you offer similar odors, that's a difficult problem, then you see differences in performance. And our hypothesis was that sparsity introduces neuronal specialization, and by this I mean that not all neurons fire in all patterns. So taking this idea and moving it to machine learning, here I present you a machine learning method called reservoir computing, in particular echo state network. It's 20 years old, and the reason that we try to use this one instead of something more recent, beyond other reasons, one is that it kind of reminds you of the mushroom body. Of course, it's an oversimplified version, but at the end, you have a bunch of neurons that are connected here with the random sparse connections that receive input from a stimulus that changes over time through connections W in, and then project just one layer downstream through connections W out. And in this setup, I'm thinking of what we call in machine learning supervised learning. That means that I'm thinking that I have stimuli of different classes, and my system has to decide to which class they belong to. So each neuron here will encode for one class. And the idea behind this kind of model is that it exploits the randomness that you have here, that gives you a rich representation, which allows you to have learn only in one layer, this output connecting matrix W out. And the way this is achieved is, which is very standard in machine learning, you minimize an error function. You do know in the framework of supervised learning what was the desirable output of your network. You know what you got, and you can calculate the error, and that can drive the changes in your weights. That's all very standard. So we're only doing a small modification that's going to bring quite a bit in, and that is, instead of having the neurons as in that reservoir in the echo-state networks connected directly to the output, we introduce a threshold that accompanies each neuron. Now, the interaction of the neuron in the reservoir is not altered by that threshold, but that affects what happens to the output layers. So effectively, the output layer through W out will receive the threshold value of these neurons. And we are going to learn this threshold by minimizing exactly the same error function as for the weights. However, it turns that you need to learn these thresholds in slower time scales, that is learning rates, than the W out. The reason is that, the mathematical reason is that the updates for these thresholds are linked to the updates of the weights. So if the weights are wrong, thresholds would be wrong. So you need to have started learning correctly the W out. But in some way, you can think it as a homeostatic mechanism. So democracy is still the best system, despite occasional flaws. And the optimal way to initialize the threshold we found that is indeed democratic. And what do I mean by this? What I'm showing you is I'm showing you the distribution of the activity of two neurons, that's a simulation. And if, for instance, I would like that both neurons are active 70% of the time and inactive the other 30% of the time, I should choose the threshold to be at the 30th percentile. So for this neuron it will be around 0.5, but for this neuron it will be 1.7 something. It's well above 1.5, as you can see here. So in order for this to behave in an equal way, I have to choose different thresholds. Now, this threshold can be also learned online. And what I'm going to use as an example is the probably most well-seen, most trivial example, but you have to start from somewhere, and that is the NIST database. These are handwritten digits 0 to 9. They compose 10 classes that you ask the system to classify. And what I would like to show you in this graph is that if my network is not very sparse, so the percentile is the 10th percentile where I'm setting my thresholds, initially, that is before learning, every neuron will fire to every class, to all the 10 classes. But as I increase the sparsity of the network, and that's again initialization only, I see that this is shifting. So you have some neurons that only fire at 9 classes, some only 8, some only 7, and so on. In other words, you do have neurons that stop firing to every pattern that they see, and this is further helped through learning these thresholds. Now, here I'm going to show you again the comparison of this method that we call sparse, the addition of the thresholds, and the echo-state network without thresholds. And accuracy is higher is better, of course. And in 3 variants of the NIST problem, sparse is doing better or much better. And in addition to this, the learning is faster. Now, which are these 3 problems? One is the NIST, which we have fed column by column because we want a signal that changes over time in this kind of models. The permuted NIST, which is I have permuted the whole database in a random but fixed permutation for all the data set, of course. And that's considered a bit more difficult. And then the permuted sequential NIST that you've given now, not column by column the data, but pixel by pixel, that requires also more memory. And that's the most challenging of the 3. There is an additional impact that this, apart from this advantage in performance, the sparsity itself helps with the problem of catastrophic forgetting. Now, this is an important problem for machine learning. What happens is that if you have a network and you train it on one task, and then you train it on another task without repeating the first one, and so on, what happens is that the learning of the newer task interferes with the memory of the earlier one, leading to the problem that performance drops. And what I'm showing you is that for this technique, As you increase the sparsity level, so here is the percentile where we initialize the network, the accuracy changes as a function of this. If the network is too sparse, the performance drops. If the network is less sparse, again, the performance drops. There is an optimal somewhere in between. This is for the problem of sequential classes for the MNIST database. That is that you train 5 digits first, and then you present the 6th, then the 7th, then the 8th, and so on, without ever repeating anything that the model says in the past. So this is one of the tests for catastrophic forgetting that other models are also using. And here I'm showing you another similar test that's again on the list, but it's about sequential permutations. So you've taken the whole database, you permuted it in a fixed permutation, you train the network in recognizing this, you permute again, you train again, and so on. And at the end, you measure overall performance for all the permutations, and you've never, of course, repeated past permutations. And again, you see the same situation. You see that there are a few, you have a few, when you have very sparse, very few neurons active, the performance drops. But again, if you increase the decrease the sparsity, it drops. There is an optimal around this area, and that optimal depends on the problem. In contrast, the echo state network accuracy is only 0.1 in that problem. So I would like to summarize here and say that I spoke about sparse, that stands for Sparse Reservoir Computing, and this is inspired by the insect brain. That's how the story started. And its key ingredients is this threshold learning, plus the democratic threshold initialization, because that really helps in having a good performance. And sparsity leads to neuronal specialization and alleviates catastrophic forgetting. Finally, there is a mathematical analysis why this is true, and comparison with more complex models. In fact, we're doing surprisingly well in that comparison in the recently published manuscript. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Eleni. And it's lovely to see an example of sort of an artificial neural inspired by biology. So again, just to remind people, please put questions into the Q&A box. And there's one already here, which asks, in one of your papers, you discussed analogs between reservoir computing and cerebellum-like networks. Since the cerebellum is associated with motor control and contains disproportionately many neurons, do you see a relationship between reservoir computing and perception action theories or loops? Oh,
it's a nice question, but also a difficult one, in the sense that reservoir computing is a very, very simple model, right? I often work with biologists that they like to make these comparisons, but from my point of view, it's a very simple example of that provides you a memory and nothing more. That's my perception of the, and I don't want to oversell it in any way. I think there is some similarity, I would say, mainly with the mushroom body, in the sense that the mushroom body seems to increase the dimensionality of your representation, and then you learn just one layer. So that's a very nice analog. But of course, I don't want to underestimate biology by saying, oh, it's like this. No, I think it's only a good model that can provide you memory. Because it's very simple, you can correlate it if you want as a toy model for other systems that have some similar behavior. But I don't want to oversell it. I'm excited about it because mathematical tractable. It's very simple. It as a component to more complex systems, also from the side of AI, it can offer, I think a lot, it can offer this memory and higher dimensionality. But I don't want to say that that's the answer in understanding cerebellum or the mushroom body, right? I want to be careful about this. But I think I believe in the result that I showed you, that this very small modification, surprisingly small, that it is actually inspired. That's how the whole discussion started, by Andrew's results brings a lot in, and in the paper, I didn't have the time to show you the results, but we compare it to much more complex methods, and it does surprisingly well for such a small add-on. So I do think that this idea of having good representations in a model, that sparsity is important, of having more non-overlapping representations, that's something that I believe in, and I think it is what brains do as well, but I don't want to say more on this.
Okay. I have a couple of questions, if I may. So I don't know if you were here this morning, but we heard Thomas Nowotny also talk about the mushroom body and
I did, and I thought how much I'm repeating, but then I thought you probably want the talks to be independent.
Oh, no.
Thomas and I were on the same project, yes.
Well, I was going to ask about the relationship, because Thomas showed that with, I think, 1,000 neurons, he could drop quite a few and performance would remain high. So it's very robust, resilient. But I don't know, I can't remember whether he had a sparsity constraint on his
no,
model.
I don't think so. At least he didn't spoke about it.
Okay, and I was wondering, my question for you then is, do you think those could interact? So if you have a sparse, encouragement to sparse representations, would you also have that same robustness still?
Okay, I'm speaking now from memory. And I remember that Thomas and his group have tried a kind of thresholds that was not working very well for them. But in that case, their thresholds were not linked to performance. So we have tried, what we are doing here is that the thresholds that we have is directly linked to an error function that you minimize, right? So as a result, it's obvious that they should improve something, right? Because you just added parameters. The question is, how good is that improvement? And the reply is quite good, actually. It's quite economical improvement, consistent to what Thomas was discussing, that, these networks are very efficient. In fact, what we did is we trained a full hidden layer in between, and we have just our method. So our method between reservoir output, between plus sparse, between reservoir, hidden layer and output, and we have performance at 2 orders of magnitude less trainable parameters, same performance. So in that sense, I think both his results and I are consistent. In talking about this economic way, you may not be the best model necessarily, but it does good, well, enough, the performance is good enough, and then you get some advantages in terms of having less learnable parameters.
Okay, and my second question was, when this threshold that you decide based on some democratic system or some percentile, I mean, you talked at the start about sort of a global inhibition, but is there a biologically plausible mechanism which can implement this choice of threshold?
Okay, in what we did so far, we didn't care about the biology and run away in the machine learning area. So our thresholds are learned independently for each neuron. One could think of having a recurrent network with different that projects, well, a inhibitor neuron that projects to the recurrent network with different weights that will emulate that. But in a sense, well, I can say why we didn't do it. It's because it will be, from the machine learning point of view, it will be an additional complexity that we didn't want to handle. But I would be very interested if we don't do it, other people who are, I've seen papers coming out or being submitted that are working in that area of what the threshold does for the performance in the area of spiking neural networks as well. So I expect that we will see more of that in the near future. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Thank you. And then the last few minutes. So, both you and Thomas emphasize the efficiency of sparse coding in general. Sort of less activity overall in the network. But the price you pay for having a large number of neurons, or if that's what the reservoir refers to, then is a potential space constraint in a brain of an organism to devote, even though the neurons may not be firing much, you have to devote some energy to having there in the first place, as opposed to other types of more compact coding. Is that ever an issue, or evolutionary, is that trivial compared to the metabolic demands of firing?
I have the feeling I'm not going give you exactly the answer you want, but I'm going to give the best that I can, in the sense that when we compared with other models, we made sure that we had the same number of neurons, or if not the same number of neurons, same number of learnable parameters. That was the best way to say it. So now, if that will translate, I will claim that algorithmic complexity also means something in terms of biology, right? It's maybe not even possible to implement at all in the first instance. So, so yes, there is a price to pay, but it looks like this 2,000 neurons that we have in, or 1,000 or 2,000 neurons in insect brain for just for the Kenyan cells, this is already is doing quite a nice job for the purpose of survival of the species. To be honest, I find it magnificent. It's simple, it's efficient. Okay, it's maybe fruit flies, maybe not the smartest species by our criteria, but still, this very small circuit does what it has to do for survival in a magnificent way. So, so I think it's at the end, it looks like it's not a bad solution, at least for this kind of problems. Of course, for I don't know if it's a good solution for more complex brains that you want to ask for more complex representations. And clearly, I don't think well, our own brains are clearly more complex than having a recurrent network and some output layer, right? So maybe there are also other solutions on the way. But for that kind of problems, simple. Not too demanding, but you want it to have it fast, robust, and in a simple learning, it looks like it's a good solution, I would say.
Yeah, I share your amazement at the solutions that biology comes up with through you know, evolution, not just of systems, but systems that learn. Efficient learning via evolution is always amazing in biology, and I'm sure AI does seem to be learning this from the bio-inspired networks that not only learn but are also optimized for learning.